Good evening, EdTech 400 class. On the final debate of the semester, we are going to be discussing whether educators have a responsibility to use technology and social media to promote social justice and fight oppression. In my case, I agree with this statement, and I'm going to tell you why. Overall, there are three major points towards my argument. We will discuss why staying neutral on social justice issues is problematic, what the risks of staying silent online are, and how using technology and social media effectively is beneficial. So, let's get started. So you may ask, why is staying neutral as a teacher problematic? Well, there are a few reasons why. First of all, it ignores the fears, interests, and concerns of your students. If your students are concerned or curious about controversial issues such as racism, inequity, climate change, or gun violence, a teacher should not be afraid to discuss these issues out of fear of appearing too political. Education is, at its core, inherently politically driven. Ignoring politics in school, or in our case, remaining neutral on these critical topics, is ignoring a large portion of what creates school as we know it. On top of this, staying neutral can also be damaging towards students. As teachers, we make choices on what content we include and exclude, and what perspectives are included and which ones are disregarded. Because of this, objectivity is practically impossible. Trying to maintain a sense of objectivity in an occupation that doesn't really endorse it can hinder our students' moral development. An example of this comes from a history teacher by the name of Jonathan Gold, who received a note from a student after a semester ended stating something along the lines of, "I learned that if you look at perspectives that are different, you will see that everyone is right for different reasons." This, of course, is not exactly true. This misunderstanding from teacher to student was not intentional and came from a misinterpretation of the teacher's neutrality. Adding on top of this, neutrality is not a very effective teaching tactic. By remaining neutral, teachers are enacting the opposite of neutrality by choosing to maintain the status quo. Especially since the 2016 US election, the status quo is exactly the opposite type of thing that we want to endorse in schools. Near the tail end of 2016, shortly before the US election, a group of 10 former state and national teachers of the year wrote an open letter on why they believe that staying politically neutral in schools is not effective and why it is in fact impossible to do so. They state, "Children are watching. They are listening. We have to show them that hatred, sexism, racism, disrespect, and threats of physical violence are not okay. They're unacceptable at any age, for a kindergartner, a high school student, or a presidential candidate." Now that we know the dangers of staying neutral, we can move on to the crux of the argument. First, we must ask ourselves, what are the risks of staying silent online? First off, it doesn't model digital citizenship for your students. How are you to effectively teach proper digital literacy, if something is real or fake, if you are taking a silent stance on politics? The majority of fake news today is largely related to politics, so if you were to ignore it completely, you are ignoring a very large and very real part of the digital realm, effectively leaving your students to try and work that out for themselves, which may not always be the right choice. Secondly, silence is complicity. Similar to what I said before, taking a silent stance is essentially the same as agreeing to whatever issue you are being silent against, or to use the words I did earlier, you're maintaining the status quo. Lastly, staying silent will leave misinformed news to reign supreme. As a teacher, if you are not willing to talk about potential fake news issues that your students might know about, you are letting that news circulate and thrive. The best way to avoid spreading of fake news is to talk about it and talk about why it is fake news. Even better, talk about ways that students can identify fake news for themselves so they can be more wary in the future. As a teacher, if there's a topic that you find online that you want to discuss for whatever reason, share it. Retweet it, share it, make a comment on it. The best way to go about not staying silent online is to get involved. This leads us to the last point, which is less of an argument and more of a small guide. How can you use technology and/or social media more effectively? First off, you can model active digital citizenship and digital literacy. If you take the time to properly use these online avenues, your students will be apt to model you. It is up to you to make sure you know how to properly use technology and social media so that your students can know how to properly use it as well. It is also extremely important to speak out and talk about issues you think are important, Like I said before, sharing and getting involved is key. To summarize, I agree with the notion that educators have a responsibility to use technology and social media to promote social justice and fight oppression. This is important because remaining neutral is problematic. Staying neutral ignores the fears, concerns, and interests of your students and can be damaging towards their learning. Staying silent online can also be risky, as silence is complicity. A silent stance is simply maintaining the potentially problematic status quo. To combat these things, it is important to know how to use technology effectively, because if you do, you can model and teach it to your students so that they also know how to use technology effectively. Thank you for listening to my side of the debate.